Hoopheads podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Nelly had just about had it with him. It was at the end of the season, and Steve just couldn't do anything. Couldn't make shots, couldn't guard, was having trouble moving, looked like just a very ordinary player that you'd find anywhere. And Nelly came and just ripped him a new one, and it happened to be right next to our offices. And after Nelly got done ripping him and brought him into this room away from the team, everybody left. All the coaches left. Nelly was pissed. He stormed out. And I stayed in the room, and I could hear something next door in the other room. I couldn't quite figure it out. I opened the door, and there's Steve Nash crying. And I went into him and consoled him, and he's like, take the money. I don't want the money. I don't need this. And it was really, I think, a pivotal moment for Steve. And he just finally, kind of let it go and got rid of all the anxiety. And then we find out, a couple of days later that he'd been playing hurt for 3 months and didn't tell anyone. But he was an emotional, I think, probably low that he had ever been in his life. And I happened just to be there to be able to console him and help him out for about 10 or 15 minutes to have him regroup before he went back in the locker room and shower to get out of there.
Scott Roth grew up in Brecksville, Ohio, and played college basketball at the University of Wisconsin. Scott played more than a decade of professional basketball, including stints with the Utah Jazz, San Antonio Spurs, and Minnesota Timberwolves. During part of his time with the Jazz, he actually lived with Karl Malone. After his playing career ended, Scott moved into coaching, where he has 24-plus years of NBA experience with 11 of those on the bench. He sat next to Don Nelson, the winningest coach in NBA history for 4 years, as a member of the Dallas Mavericks coaching staff. Scott has coached 4 different national teams, coached in the D-League, and this past season in the NBA G League. Scott was hired by Tom Thibodeau of the Minnesota Timberwolves this past season to create a new culture and foundation for the newly acquired Iowa Wolves. Scott has had a good run of coaching and developing players. He's been lucky enough to impact Pau Gasol, Dirk Nowitzki, Kristaps Porzingis, Jonas Valanciunas, Amir Johnson, Shane Battier, Steve Nash, and many others. He was also the defensive coach in Toronto under Dwane Casey and took them from 30th to the top 10 in every defensive category. I have known Scott since the mid-1980s when he was nice enough to take a young kid under his wing and allow me to train with him during the summer. Scott Roth is a great coach and, just as important, a great person. You're going to enjoy listening to this episode and learning from Coach Scott Roth from the NBA G League's Iowa Wolves. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel, and tonight we are pleased to have my longtime friend, current head coach of the Iowa Wolves of the G League, Scott Roth. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be with you guys.
Very excited to have you on and kind of reminisce. We've known each other for a long time, and it's just we really appreciate you jumping on with us. I want to start, Scott, with going back to the time when you started playing basketball and talk a little bit about how you first got introduced to the game and what your first experiences were.
One thing, like most kids, when I was growing up in Brecksville, I played everything. I played baseball, football, and basketball at a very young age. And like anything else, just as the course of getting older, I got wiser, and baseball was something that you couldn't do by yourself very much. Football became too cold in the winter, and so I kept gravitating more to basketball. So by the time I got to 7th, 8th grade, I kind of really knew deep down that I was just going to end up playing basketball. I was actually fairly good in the other sports, but it just gravitated to that more and had more introduction to being in the gym during the winter and playing some AAU stuff. So it started off that way, and then from there, basically, I had some. I credit them highly. Some very, very good young coaches at the time that were mentoring me and guiding me along as I got older, and obviously in the high school. But I was very fortunate at a young age to get around some very good coaches that really guided me and started to nurture me into becoming a good player.
And so as you got into high school and, you're playing at Brecksville, and obviously you had a tremendous amount of success, and, you had some good teammates during that era, at Brecksville High School. Talk a little bit about how you ended up at the University of Wisconsin, what that recruiting process looked like for you, and how you made the decision ultimately to go to Wisconsin.
Well, I was very fortunate when I got to Brecksville. My brother played ahead of me, so I watched my brother, who's 10 years older than me, but I watched him play at Brecksville, and, you kind of emulate the people that are ahead of you. And so it was my dream always to play for the Brecksville Bees and wear the uniform and get coached by Gerald Becker, who ended up being in the Hall of Fame in Ohio for high school basketball coaches. And by the time I became a freshman and was coming into my freshman year, I got selected to be able to go try out for the varsity, and no one in Brecksville history had done that before. And I ended up making the varsity team as a freshman, which was unheard of. And then from that point on, I actually ended up playing and then ended up starting by the end of the year. And things just seemed to blossom from there. After that first year, a second year I came in, and that summer, my freshman summer, I started getting scholarship offers already. And so at that point I knew, I was on to something. I was getting good. I had played well. People around the country were starting to notice me, and I started getting letters left and right as a freshman. And then going into my sophomore year, I had Coach Becker again. He retired. And then I was lucky enough to have this coach named Biff Lloyd come in and coach me, who basically opened up everything to me. Let me play point guard at 6'7" at that time. Let me handle the basketball, do things that were unheard of for high school kids. Played at a much faster pace. And again, continued to get highly recruited. Was the number one ranked player in the state for a while. Unfortunately, I broke my foot my senior year, but by the time I got to my senior year, I had over 300 offers. And I ended up, making my 6 visits to Tennessee, Arkansas, Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, and San Diego State. And I knew I was going to play in the Big Ten. I had followed that growing up and watching it. I thought, to be honest with you, I was going to go play with Clark Kellogg at the time. That was my high school idol who I watched. And I ended up growing up with Brad Sellers and Charles Oakley in the same group that I used to play with in the summers. And so we kind of made a pact that we were all going to go to school together and play with Clark. When we went down for our visit to Ohio State, Clark said he was going to leave to go to the pros that next year. And so things kind of went differently. Charles didn't have grades to get into a Division I school right away, so he went to Virginia Union. Then myself and Brad Sellers accepted a scholarship to Wisconsin, and really it was all because of Bull Ryan. He became like a father figure to me. And myself and Brad went to Wisconsin. We were roommates at Wisconsin. So it was quite the process. It was exciting, obviously. It's nice to be wanted. And it was a great process for me.
Describe how summer basketball was different for you when you were in high school during that era compared to what kids experience today. Like when you were playing in the summertime and, the AAU, and I always tell people that, like when I was playing, at least it seemed like there was 2 teams. There was a kind of a West Side AAU team, and there was maybe one East Side downtown team, and that was pretty much it. Was it kind of the same way for you, or describe what that looked like?
I think a couple of things that jump out to me. One, when I was a freshman, and I was playing with Brad Sellers and Charles Oakley when I was in 6th and 7th grade, and going into the inner city, which was unheard of for a kid from the suburbs to go there. But my parents were nice enough to drop me off down there. And by the time I got my driver's license when I was 16, I was really the only white guy going down in the inner city of Cleveland to play basketball on the weekends. And again, that sped up my growth of playing against a higher competition, different guys, different way of playing. And so I got accepted very quickly down there, and I think that really sped up my growth. But I think the biggest thing, that I see now, just the transition over the last 20 years or so, or back when we were playing, is when I went to basketball camp in the summers, which I did. I went to Austin Carr's basketball camp every single year since I was in 7th grade until I graduated. I came back as a counselor. I came back as a professional speaker there. It was all about fundamentals. You went to camp, you had fundamentals in the morning, you had lunch, you had fundamentals in the afternoon, and if you're lucky, you got to play one game at night. And that's how I learned how to play basketball, through fundamentals and through coaching. And obviously the big flip in the X amount of years that have gone by is no one goes to basketball camp anymore to do that. They just go to play AAU. They play 100, 200 games in the summer. They travel all over the country. They got coaches that don't even coach, that are just money guys that are funneling money to acquire guys. You got shoe companies involved. And so the fundamentals are gone, in my opinion, of when I was growing up to what's now AAU basketball. And, it was a great benefit being back then because it was just a different way of being brought up and trained to play. And it was actually more to what the Europeans are doing nowadays and continue to do. Is they're fundamentally driven countries over there, and we used to be like that, but now we've kind of flipped.
Yeah, I think there's two things that stick out from what you said. One is the fact that kids are not playing, they're playing too many games, and then they're also not playing pickup basketball the way you or I played pickup basketball, where you're going and you're finding and seeking out competition. Nowadays, kids are just playing in a gym with fans, with their parents there, with a coach, with a referee, and they never get an opportunity to do what you or I did, which is play against older, better kids, play against adults. And I think you learn so much about how to play and really develop not just playing and basketball skills, but you also develop, like for you, you're going down and you're playing in a different environment than what you're used to, and you got to learn to stand up for yourself, and you got to learn how to navigate and deal with different kinds of people. And I think that's something that today kids miss out on. I think that's a big piece of when you see like the number of kids that transfer from Division I schools, and there's just kids are always looking for this, I don't know if it's the easy way out or what it is, but it seems like the playground way of growing up and being able to play in that environment, and then, like you said, have camps and things where you learn the fundamentals. You combine those two, and to me, that's always the best of both worlds, as opposed to just playing, as you said, like 100, 120 games a summer.
It's hard for me to wrap my head around, if I was transported back to that time and playing 100 games in the summer, it would just be mind-boggling to me, the expense and the travel around and do all that. I can't imagine a parent or kids just flying to games in high school. I mean, it's just crazy. So things have definitely obviously changed. Some of it's for the good, and I think some of it's obviously digressed basketball a little bit with how we've done it. But it's just the nature of the beast at this point.
So talk a little bit about when you were at Wisconsin and your career there, and when you started to feel like, I mean, I'm sure growing up with the guys that you did and the high school career that you had and the opportunities that you got, you kind of always had in the back of your mind that you'd be able to play basketball professionally. But as you started to get through, your career, and you started to get some feedback from pro guys about where you might fit and where you might have an opportunity to play, talk a little bit about your career at Wisconsin and how that progressed into what eventually became your professional playing career.
Yeah, I mean, it is a process. You go in there as a freshman in Wisconsin. And one of the reasons why we picked Wisconsin was Bo Ryan, myself, and Brad. But they were at the lower ring of the Big Ten at that time, and we thought this was going to be our best chance to play right away. And it was. And it turned out to be like that. But through circumstances why we were there for the next couple of years, obviously Brad left and went back to Ohio State, and I ended up staying my 4 years. But it was just a process. It was just, everywhere you went, you just continued to get better. Every year, people are getting bigger, stronger, and faster. And as you started to play against, great players that were in the Big Ten at that time from my freshman year all the way through, you start to see where you stack up and where you are. In my mind, I really knew I was going to play professional basketball. I really didn't know I was going to play in the NBA. My dream was to play in the NBA, but I knew, there's a reality to that. But I knew that I could definitely play in Europe. I think my junior year, we went over with the university to make a tour for 2 weeks and played against some professional teams in the summer when I was at Wisconsin. And at that point, I really knew I could play over there, going up against some of the professional teams and some of the guys that were already over there. So by the time I got to my senior year, I was hoping to get drafted. But again, my concern really wasn't about playing in the NBA. It was more about, can I find a niche somewhere in Europe? And I ended up getting drafted by San Antonio my senior year. And in 4 days got cut. Reality sinks in pretty darn quick, but I wasn't discouraged by it by any means. I knew I had to get better. The Big Ten at that time was a very slow, grinding, pace kind of team. Games were in the 60s. Maybe you got in the 70s in the Big Ten at that time. So the game was much different, and I knew I had to get better. And so when I had the opportunity to go to Europe, that's what I did. I got better in 2 years over there. I came back, and Bill Musselman got me up in the CBA, and Albany Patroons was probably one of the greatest minor league professional teams ever assembled. I was lucky enough to play in that group and got called up in 2 months to the Utah Jazz. And basically Europe just prepared me for a different style of play, a different way of training, a faster paced game. And like I said, when I left Wisconsin, I knew I was still getting better. I just didn't know where it was going to lead me. And I was just fortunate enough, some of it's right place, right time, but that with Bill Musselman and Albany was loaded with players from Scotty Brooks to Michael Ray Richardson to Michael Brooks, Tony Campbell, Rick Carlisle, Sam Mitchell, Sidney Lowe. All 10 of those guys ended up in the NBA the following year. It was quite the team to learn from and play with. But it was just a process. And like I said, I was lucky, but I was also a worker and a grinder. And I was always playing. As you know, I was always around, trying to get better, trying to work on something to improve myself. But like I said, when I went to Europe, again, another kind of style of basketball opened up to me and allowed me to continue to grow and get better.
What were some of the things that you did that you would attribute to your improvement? And so in the summertime, whether it was when you were at Wisconsin or, once you were playing professionally, what were some of the things that you tried to focus on, or what did you do in terms of your training that you felt helped make you a better player and prepare you to, get a shot at the NBA?
I think, first of all, you got to have some discipline. You got to put the work in. You can't say you're going to do something and then get gung-ho about it for a week and then you can't duplicate it the following week. And I played basketball every single day, probably twice a day. As you know, I had a trainer when I got to the professional level that I went to the Omni at the time and had a trainer train me that I paid out of my own pocket for physical conditioning, weight training. I'd go back and shoot in the mornings and usually come back and try to find a game somewhere in the evening. But I actually think the biggest thing that was my benefit was that I was a positionless player. I could do a little bit of everything. At my size, I could handle the ball, I could shoot the ball. And I think if you look at the NBA in the last 2 or 3 years, that's what the league has become, is a positionalist league where guys just can play. The Golden State Warriors are obviously the team to look at, but I think the versatility of just being able to play. So in the summers, I was playing point guard, I was playing full court one-on-one, I was handling the basketball. I was just doing a bunch of different things on top of this, my general shooting and training that I was doing, and continuing to try to work on my conditioning and continue to try to get bigger and stronger and faster to stay at the level of the guys that I was playing against. When you get into a game with Karl Malone as your teammate, or you're getting practice with a guy, reality kicks in real quick about how good guys are, and Stockton and those guys that were my teammates. You have to push yourself to get to a level that you can compete with them. And so that was kind of my summer mentality, is just continue to get better, continue to do the work, continue to show up, not make excuses, and try to get better and see how long I could do it.
So you talked a lot about what your playing career, at least how you got better and whatnot, but what's the one thing after coaching for all these years and being around everything that you wish you knew when you first started out about your game, or how basketball should be played, or what's the one thing now that sticks out in your mind that you wish you knew back when you started?
Well, I know if I was back when I was playing, I'd be making a few $1 million today.
That's for sure.
Because, back when I played, you didn't hear anything about a pick and roll or a spacing 4-man or 4s and 5s that could shoot the perimeter shots. And so those are things that I was doing already to some degree, but that wasn't the style of play back then. It was very structured sets, but not a lot of pick and roll basketball, not a lot of spacing and open floor. And the way the game's being played now, I would have been thriving, I think, even more just because of the versatility, because I could do a few different things, as opposed to being, I'm just a 3-man or I'm just a point guard or whatever it was. Very, very few people back then crossed over into other positions. Back then, I keep telling our guys here every now and then, when I played, it was traditional. You had 3 smalls on the outside. You had a point guard, a 2, and a 3, and you had a power forward, a traditional power forward, a traditional center. You had Worthy, Jabbar, McHale, Bird. You'd go right down the line, Smits, Dale David. You had right down the line, you had traditional spots being filled by traditional sized players. Where the Cavs had Doherty and Dance. So now you don't see that anymore. So if I was playing now, or I wish, that would be to jump off the bat that I would be able to be, I think, a little bit better because I see a lot of guys that are making a lot of money. You can go look from the Matt Bonners to the world all the way through that have made a great career. Just doing simple things, but being Again, guys that can pick and pop and shoot and move the ball and are spacing four kind of guys. I think that's what I would end up being at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's amazing how much the game has changed, especially in the last, 5 or 6 years. And obviously you see it more than certainly even we do from seeing it from the inside. But I think you're right when you look at the style of play has such an effect on where guys, and not just yourself, but anybody, where you get an opportunity to play, and whether or not you fit into a coach's system in the past was probably more important, whereas now there's such an emphasis on having a wide range of skills, especially being able to do it, as you described, when you're 6'9" and you can do a little bit of everything. It gives you a better opportunity to be able to play. And so I think, as I think about the time that that I spent with you, and watching you play and playing against you and playing with you, I can certainly see where the skill level that you had definitely would have fit into today's basketball probably a lot more seamlessly than it might have in the past. So talk a little bit about. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. And I think it's a shame, and I still see it when I watch some games here or there. I walk into a gym just randomly and see some young kids playing. I was very fortunate to have coaches that just didn't put me into a box. I was the tallest guy. You're the center, so you can't dribble, you can't shoot outside. Go stand underneath the rim. And I think again, getting coached correctly when you're young and being exposed to everything really can open up to guys' desires to want to play. And I was fortunate not to be put in a box and say, you're the tallest guy, go stand on the rim. But when I came into a gym, if I got a rebound, I was able to dribble up the floor. I was able to shoot threes. I was able to handle the basketball. And I think I just, at a young age, too many kids are just put into those spots where maybe it deters them actually from wanting to play anymore, because you're the biggest guy, go stand on the rim, or you're the smallest guy, you got to go handle the ball. And I think the versatility is what's missing with some of the young coaching now.
Yeah, I think coaches are becoming a little bit more educated, at least people who are out there reading, listening to, trying to grow at what they do, because there's a lot of good information out there about not putting players in a box, but there's still a lot of, unfortunately, coaches that are, whether they're just fathers that really aren't coaches, but they're just kind of out there and they throw kids out there on the floor and without really regard for knowing what they're supposed to be doing. And that's the thing that I think that, I see it in youth basketball, kind of the space that I'm in now, is I just see so many coaches doing so many things that either stifle the development of their players or just make it, like you said, so the game's not fun. And then you get kids dropping out and not playing and not participating. That's one of the things that I'm hoping that we're doing a little bit with the podcast as we talk to more and more coaches from around the country and people that are doing things in the game, that we can get the message out to people, again, who are trying to grow themselves and get better as a coach, to give kids an opportunity to do everything on the floor, especially the way that the game, whether it's the NBA or all the way down to the college and high school level, so much of it has now become, as you described, positionless basketball, that I think you're doing kids a huge disservice if you don't give them the ball and just let them play at whatever size they are.
Right. Yep. I'm with you, brother.
So let's go back to how you befriended a skinny 15-year-old Mike Klinzing when you were looking to develop your game, and talk a little bit about that story, how you and I got together and met for the first time.
Well, I think, like anything else, when you're going around playing and you're at different playgrounds or you're in pickup areas, you're going to see the gym rats. You're going to see people that actually are working at what they're trying to do. And I believe, was it out at the playgrounds by your house?
Yeah, playgrounds by my house, absolutely.
So that was one of the areas that on certain nights had very good pickup games, and then it became a process of just seeing you out there working, out there by yourself. I would get there early sometimes and see you out there running around, shooting. And, when you see someone that has the same kind of passion that you do, you end up gravitating to them. And obviously we became friends from that point on. And then obviously if we had pickup games, I'd pick you on you on my team. And so it just grew from there. But anytime you walk into a gym and you're going into places multiple times and you're seeing certain people there all the time, they have some kind of passion to do what you're doing. And obviously, I can remember, meeting you in the mornings and going out and shooting, meeting you at the Omni, going to shoot, playing full court one-on-one in the mornings when it's 90 degrees, and just being around you. And then obviously that transpired into X amount of years there. And then we had our little AAU type of team that we put together, which was fun with some guys from there. And the relationship grew from there. But when you find people who have the passion and you can see it right away and it's very obvious, you're going to gravitate to those guys anyways.
On the other end of the spectrum, we often talk about how you go show up to a gym and the guys you don't want to play with. So I'm sure you probably saw some of those guys too, right?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to play with the guys with the best shoes on and the best clothes on. I mean, because they can't play.
Yeah.
They just went off their gear, but they lick it, but they can't play it. So,
yeah.
After you go to certain gyms a while and you're traveling around the city and certain nights you can go to Independence and play, or you go to Strong Zone and play, or you go downtown to a certain park, the guys that are going to be showing up, the guys that are making the same traveling rounds that you are. You start to connect with those guys, and you know who's got game and who doesn't, and obviously you want to hold the court, so you better get the best players.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I will say that, I know I've probably said it to you in the past, but I could say it to you again, that I think that, I'm thankful that you kind of took me under your wing, and I think that the things that you and I did together, the workouts we did and the one-on-one we played and the times that we would get in the car and drive to Heights Y or drive and, play at Cleveland State or, go and, like you said, get our pro-am team together every summer. I attribute a lot of the success that I end up having in the game to our relationship and the ability that you gave me as a kid who was, a lot younger than you and not at your level, to be able to play and get out there and compete against you and work with you and see what it took. So I just want you to know that, again, I appreciate everything that you did for me back in the day, and it was a lot of fun. And I think that what you spoke to right there about the passion for the game, there's no way to fake that. And I think that that's something that you and I both had some admiration for the other when it came to those things.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
So talk about your time in the NBA. I know there was a point when you were with the Jazz that you lived in Karl Malone's house, correct?
Yeah. I first got signed from Albany Troons to Utah. I signed a 2-year contract, which is also, again, kind of unheard of. And I don't know what it was or what happened or why, but when I got to Utah, my first game, I flew into Salt Lake City from New York, did my physical in the morning, hopped on a plane with the team, flew to LA, and that next night I was guarding Magic Johnson. So it went from playing in an Armory in New York to the Forum. And after that game, we flew back to Salt Lake, and it's been less than 24 hours, and they put me in a hotel. And when we landed in Salt Lake, again, I had no idea why, but Malone took me to the hotel, and the next morning Malone picked me up and took me to the gym. And we kind of just kept hanging for the next 3 or 4 days. And eventually, obviously, I had to find a place to live. And he said, just live with me for the rest of the year. And next thing you know, I'm living with Karl Malone. And I don't know, a week before that, I was at a Motel 6 in Albany, New York, getting $250 a week to play for the Albany Platoon. So it was a whirlwind, but I was very fortunate to be on that team, first of all, to see, to play with 2 Hall of Famers, Stockton and Malone, and see them work every single day, and to see the character and the quality of how they were as people, and then to have Jerry Sloan coach you and Frank Layden. I was very fortunate to be on that team, and I was also very fortunate because that first year with them was kind of really the beginning of Karl Malone and John Stockton becoming household names in the NBA, and they were just starting to explode onto the scene. And so to see that in person and watch those two work in practice, in games, was tremendous. Tremendously fortunate to do that with them for 2 years.
So what was it like? Describe for people who maybe don't know Karl Malone that well. Describe what it was like living with him. Describe what that looked like.
The thing with Karl is he can be a little gruff and rough with you if he doesn't know you. Again, we kind of hit it off right away. I don't know why, or I don't even question it. But he's a southern easygoing Southern guy, sweetheart. His mom flies catfish into him like every Thursday from Louisiana. He's just a good old boy from the South, easygoing. At that time, he was into trucks, motorcycles, just a big time worker, just a sweetheart of a guy, but had the image of being, a nasty, tough guy, which he definitely was on the court. But he was just very open. He just, like I said, to take someone like myself in there and just say, come and live in my house with you. I mean, he tells you the kind of character the guy had right away. But, he was just great to hang out with on the road. We'd have dinner every night at home in Salt Lake. We'd go eat wherever. He was just easy going, easy to be around, funny. Like I said, just kind of hit it off with him, and it was obviously a great experience to have a chance to live with someone like that.
So you said he was really big into motorcycles. Just out of curiosity, did the team talk to him about motorcycles at all? Because I know nowadays they put things in contracts and stuff, right?
At that point, it wasn't getting to that point of banning those kind of things. So he just started tinkering motorcycles and was into trucks. But obviously nowadays you can't do that. But at that point, those things were starting to come in to affect some of those rules when you started signing new contracts and so forth about staying away from, water sports or whatever. So he tinkered around with that in the beginning when I was there. And I'm sure after I had left, the contractual things started to kick in with some of that stuff. But he's always been, a guy that's likes to fish, likes to hunt, likes, the big rig trucks, and like I said, he's just kind of a good old boy.
But after you left Utah, you had two more stints, one with the Spurs and also with the Timberwolves. Talk about the difference between those three organizations and kind of your experience at each one, and how they were different, the same, and what you learned as you went through each one of those stops.
I mean, when I left Utah, I got released. And then about 10 days later, San Antonio Spurs signed me for 2 more years. And Larry Brown had just taken over that team, and we had just drafted Dave Robinson, who was staying at the Naval Academy but was with us on the weekends. And that was a rebuild job in San Antonio at the time when Larry took over. And so there was just the opposite cast of characters that were in Utah, which were professional guys, big-time professional basketball players that did their jobs and were pros on and off the court. And you get down to San Antonio, and you got a bunch of mixture of just all types down there. And so it was a very trying year, but the good thing was, since they weren't very good, you got to play a lot. And I got to play under Larry Brown, which was another Hall of Fame coach. And so I got to learn, obviously, a lot from him. And then my workout coach was Greg Popovich. And so Pop would work me out before every practice. And so I got to be, obviously, that was my first connection with Greg Popovich. And R.C. Buford was the other assistant coach who obviously now runs the Spurs. So that time there was good. That when that season was over with, the expansion draft happened in Minnesota, and it just so happened that my coach that was in Albany, Bill Musselman, became the head coach of that team, and I got picked in the expansion draft. And myself and Tyrone Corbin were the only 2 out of the 10 picks to make it. And that following year, then we played up in Minneapolis, and that was obviously the expansion year. And the biggest memories there are playing in the Humphrey Dome, and opening night 63,000. Played Boston, there was I think 68,000. We played the Bulls, there was 58,000. And we set the attendance record, I think it was 35,000 a night. And so it was just an incredible thing to be playing in the dome, in the football dome, while the arena was being built. Playing in front of these massive crowds every single night was just crazy to watch a basketball game. And so it was pretty cool with the expansion team, and a lot of those expansion players actually were guys that I ended up playing with in Albany. And so it was kind of cool to reconnect with them and play with them. It was just a great experience.
And when while you were there, obviously, as you went through these stops, you got to be connected to some great guys that, I'm sure you continue to stay in touch with and have helped you in your, as you got into your coaching career. you continue to go and play, after your NBA experience, and you go and play over in Europe, and you were in a bunch of different countries. Describe which one of the countries is your favorite and why.
Well, I was fortunate enough to play when I left. When I got cut from the Spurs early on, I went to Turkey, and my mom started crying. But I went to Istanbul, Turkey, and played for a team called FS Pilsen, which is a beer company over there. When I retired, when I left the NBA, I went back to Europe and played in Spain for a team called Talgres, which is now Baskonia. And then I played with Panathinaikos in Greece, which is still there. And I was lucky enough to win 5 championships in those 6 years with those teams. Great teams, great organizations, great companies. Those teams still exist. They're still the best in Europe. And so I was very fortunate to get in great situations and great places to play. My favorite place, without a doubt, is Istanbul, Turkey. I love it there. I love the people there. I still talk to people. I talk to some people today from there. I was fortunate enough to go back there in the European Championships and coach with Hito Turkoglu was on the team, Mehmet Okur, and one of the greatest experiences of my life, probably one of the top 1 or 2 experiences ever, was that 6 to 8 weeks that I was in that country coaching that team and what we went through in that championship. So that's definitely my favorite place. Greece is right behind it. But I've been lucky enough to travel all over the world and play all over the world or coach all over the world. And all of them are nice, but Turkey's my favorite. Just the people are great, and it's just an incredible city.
So at what point during your playing career did you start to think that you wanted to coach? I mean, I'm sure growing up with as much basketball as you did that you always knew you wanted to stay in basketball. But at what point did you think, hey, I think I might want to pursue the coaching profession?
I mean, I knew in high school I was going to coach. I just didn't know where or when or how it was going to be, but I knew I was going to coach. And so when I got to the end of my career and I retired, I called my wife coming out of the Omni one day. I said, I'm coming home. And she's like, yeah, okay, what's the big deal? I go, I'm not coming back. I'm done. I've had some foot stuff going on with plantar fasciitis. My daughter just was born and starting to start school. And I just had enough at 33 and doing it every day. And I never, to this day, have ran full court, played a full court game, nothing since the day I walked out of the Omni. And so I knew that was my next stop, was, going into coaching from there. And so I called Bo Ryan. At that time, he now had moved to Platteville and won a couple national championships. I took a sabbatical from leaving Cleveland to go there for 6 months and see if I wanted to try to be a pro coach or a college coach. So I worked with Bo in Platteville there. We won the national championship that year. It was just a great time there being back with Bo. I saw the kind of the inner workings of Division III basketball, but I kind of knew what was going on and whether I liked it or not. And I just kept gravitating back to trying to get back in the NBA. And I knew the only way to get back in the NBA and get my name recirculated was to try to get in the scouting areas. And that's what I ended up doing. I ended up networking and contacting people. I was in Platteville and got into the NBA through scouting, and then started networking again and just tried to figure out how I was going to become, how I was going to be able to get onto a bench. So that was kind of the process. I like college basketball. I just don't like, it's all year round in college. You got to deal with a lot of boosters. You got to deal a lot with families. You got, your responsibility for the kids. Recruiting's, somewhat of a nightmare. So it's a 24-hour job. And in the pros, it's much more volatile. But at the end of the day, you coach for the 7 or 8 months, and then you're off. And you don't have to worry about waking up in the middle of the night and someone stealing a radio from a dorm room or kids doing something on campus. You're talking about grown men, and you don't have the repercussions of worrying about those things. You just got to worry about trying to win games and develop players. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I love college, but at that time when I was going through the process, I was just not gung-ho on the recruiting part and the 24-hour a day worry I saw Bo Ryan go through, and then, in the summers you got basketball camps continuously. It's just a nonstop job in college basketball.
So when you started out as a scout, describe what a lot of people I'm sure don't really know what a scout does. And there's probably, there's different categories of whether you're scouting, opposing NBA teams, you're kind of an advanced scout, or you're scouting college players, or, a pro personnel type guy. So talk about what exactly you did for the Lakers and the Bucks when you first started out as a scout.
I started out very early on, did three things. I was pro personnel. I did NBA games, scouted NBA players for trades from other teams. I did college scouting, which obviously is just getting ready for the draft. And then I also, since I had just left Europe, I did international scouting for the Lakers for a summer. So I did all three of those that kind of crossed over. And again, expanding networking, because you're in these buildings and you're in other places and you're starting to meet more people, and they're starting to re-recognize you. A lot of my friends that got into the NBA, they ended up retiring and then or stopped playing and got right involved from the NBA. Where I went to Europe, and so I was kind of out of sight, out of mind, because at that point, the internet wasn't around, there wasn't FaceTime, no one knew what was going on in Europe per se, and so I had to reintroduce myself after being away from the NBA for a few years as far as playing wise. So the scouting stuff allowed me to circulate through, see other scouts, see other general managers, start to meet the other NBA coaches. And so those were the three areas that, I ended up working at until I got a coaching job.
And so your first job was with the Dallas Mavericks. Talk about how that came to be, and then what you did, what your time was like at Dallas.
Yeah, so I basically, during the scouting process, ran across Dwane Nelson, that's Dwane Nelson Jr., and became friends with him, and networked with him and stayed in touch with him basically through the course of that season. And then his dad, who I didn't know, took over the Dallas Mavericks as a general manager, and then fired Jim Clemens, 20 games in. And Don Jr. called his dad and said, "I got an assistant coach for you." And 2 days later, I was in Dallas and working for Don Nelson, and ended up, another guy that, greatly has impacted me. I worked with him there. He took me to Golden State later on. I lived with him while I coached in Golden State. He took me to the Hall of Fame. When he got inducted, the last scout that I had when I was with Golden State was the game that he got the winningest coach in NBA history. Was my scout as assistant coach. And very fortunate to be with a Hall of Famer and the winningest coach in the NBA for X amount of years, sitting on the bench next to him. But that's kind of how I ended up getting into, through scouting, through his son. And then one phone call got me to Dallas. I went to Nelly's house, watched a basketball game with him, never met him before. I walked out of the house that night and I was hired. And that started my coaching career in the NBA.
What were some of the things that, obviously, not getting into specific details of X's and O's, but what were some things you learned from him in terms of what it took to coach in the NBA? What were some of the tidbits and just things that you picked up from being that close with him and being able to watch him on a daily basis that made you a better coach as you continued on in your career?
I mean, I was fortunate to be coached by a lot of great coaches, and I include those ones that are in Europe. And I think they're really good coaches. There's a high level of accountability. They're truth sayers. They're going to tell you not exactly what you want to hear all the time, but they're going to tell you what they feel and what they think, and they're going to know where you stand. And Nelly was in that mode too. Obviously, a tremendous amount of experience, tremendous amount of years in the league. And at that point, when I was with them, the other thing was he was fearless. He didn't care what people thought. They called him the mad scientist at one point when I was there, and Sports Illustrated did a big article about him. We had Dirk Nowitzki guarding Muggsy Bogues. I mean, he would just try anything without any fear of any repercussion. And the creativity that he had was, they talk about small ball and all that with Mike D'Antoni. Well, Don Nelson was way, way ahead of Mike D'Antoni. Before Mike D'Antoni ever got into the NBA, Nelly was already playing small ball with Run TMC at Golden State. Madou Bull at 7'6", shooting threes. He had Mullen, and you had Sprewell in the backcourt. So he was already playing small ball and gadgeting things up way before that ever would happen. So he was just a creative guy. I was very fortunate for my first ever job to have a guy like him that was not crazy as far as being office at 5 a.m. You watch video all day. He was much more laid back, easygoing, and someone that, obviously I've had a strong and a long bond and a long connection with him through the years.
While you were there, talk a little bit about Dirk and Steve Nash and the opportunity that you had to work and build a relationship with those guys and what that was like.
Yeah, I mean, my first year there, we took it on the chin, and then that summer, that summer coming into that draft, we ended up by dumb luck, Dirk came to Dallas to work out for a national team that came over to play USA basketball in the Final Four, and Nowitzki was in our gym for 2 weeks as like a 17-year-old, and we couldn't believe it. And so we finagled to get up into the draft to get him, and then later in the draft, we ended up sending Pat Garrity to Phoenix to get Steve Nash, and that started the whole Dallas brigade. And again, two great pros, Dirk with a European work ethic and just highly skilled, two great people. Mike Finley was in that group, a Wisconsin guy, another all-star, another great pro. All three of those guys were just tremendous people. Not only great players, but just tremendous people. They give you the shirt off your back. They were loyal. They were fun to be around. Just great pros, great workers. Dirk and Nash would come back in the evenings, 9, 10, 11 at night, and play horse and play all kinds of crazy games and taking crazy shots. And they just had a tremendous work ethic. And then, again, that's why they're in the Hall of Fame. They just outworked people. They just were tremendous players, but they just had a work ethic that was undeniable. And just, again, fortunate how that all played itself out to get those two guys in the same draft.
So what's the best story you have from one of those two guys? Just something that maybe the average person, the public NBA fan, doesn't know about one or the other of those two guys?
I mentioned it because Steve just went into the Hall of Fame, and I texted him to remind him again, and it was mentioned in some of the stuff, if you read when he went to the Hall of Fame, when he first got with Nelly was really, really hard on him the first 2 or 3 months, and Steve was playing really poorly to the point where they started booing him. And Nelly was had it with him. And, Nelly kind of stuck his neck out to get him and gave him a contract at that time. I think it was about $5 million a year, which was kind of a high-end contract then. And he was playing poorly. Well, we didn't know later on that he had some spinal fracture that he was playing through, and that he was injured. But long story short is after one of the games, Nelly had just about had it with him. It was at the end of the season. And Steve just couldn't do anything, couldn't make shots, couldn't guard, was having trouble moving, looked like just a very ordinary player that you'd find anywhere. And Nelly came and just ripped him a new one, and it happened to be right next to our offices. And after Nelly got done ripping him and brought him into this room away from the team, everybody left. All the coaches left. Nelly was pissed. He stormed out, and I stayed in the room, and I could hear something next door in the other room. I couldn't quite figure it out. I opened the door, and there's Steve Nash crying. And I went into him and consoled him, and he's like, take the money. I don't want the money. I don't need this. And it was really, I think, a pivotal moment for Steve. And he just finally, kind of let it go and got rid of all the anxiety. And then we find out, a couple of days later that he'd been playing hurt for 3 months and didn't tell anyone. But he was an emotional, I think, probably low that he had ever been in his life. And I happened just to be there to be able to console him and help him out for about 10 or 15 minutes to have him regroup before he went back in the locker room and shower to get out of there.
Yeah, I think sometimes people, discount the fact that guys are human, and we see them so much on TV, and, you picture them as superstars, and you picture them as guys that are not, they're not susceptible to pressure. They're not susceptible to some of the normal things that all the rest of us are susceptible to. And we forget that that underneath their NBA uniform, that they're people too. And I think that story kind of brings that home for sure.
And I think another thing too is I think the people are becoming more aware of it now, especially with all the stuff that like Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan have been going on about, like, we're people too. We don't, just because you see us as superhuman athletes, doesn't mean we don't have emotions and problems too. So I think nowadays definitely is way more prevalent than when, like the instance you're talking about. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no question. No question. I mean, hey, you can have a lot of money and have a lot of problems, so I don't know who said that. Is that 50 Cent, more money, more problems?
I believe that was Notorious B.I.G., but we won't
I said it, so I know, it's true to some degree, and just the money doesn't make things go away if you have other issues going on, family issues or just personal issues or whatever. So life's not easy.
How much, like on an average NBA team, like how much time does a team spend dealing now with sort of those types of issues with players? Like, is there, I mean, probably back when you first started, there wasn't maybe people that are kind of monitoring that, but I would guess now with the amount of staff that teams have, that they're probably keeping close tabs kind of on guys, the mental state of where guys are.
Back then, we just had a trainer. Now they got everything. They got nutritionists. They got, X amount of different types of doctors. Podiatrists are in there. You got psychologists now. You got sports psychologists now. Just have a variety of different people that are now monitoring things. And now, obviously in the last few years, the concussions have come back. So every year it seems to be something else. And then obviously they're trying to, get ahead of some stuff, but the teams have a wealth of resources that they're using, and the players know it, and the league's supplying it for them, and some players are taking advantage of it. But all the teams just have a wealth of resources for the players, whatever they need.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a big change from back when, first of all, when you were playing, and then even starting at the beginning of your coaching career, where it was much more of a bare bones staff. You had maybe, a head coach and 2 assistants and a trainer, and that was pretty much it. And now, you look behind an average NBA bench and there's, 15 guys sitting there in suits, and I'm sure people are wondering, well, what's that guy? What's his role? What does he do? So it's interesting to hear you say what those different people are that are what they do, and the amount of support that the players have kind of behind the scenes.
Yep. I wonder what they're doing to it sometimes.
So you move on, you go from Dallas, and you have a bunch of several other NBA stops after that as an assistant coach. Talk a little bit about how each of the organizations that you went to, were there clear differences between how they did things and kind of what your role was, or did you kind of stay in a similar role in each one of your stops as you went through?
I was a defensive coach in one role. I was a player development coach in one role. I was an offensive coach with Nelly. I diagrammed all the end of game plays. Every place was a little bit different depending on what the head coach needed. And then every organization was completely different, from ownership down, management down, and how they were run. And just like anything in the world, there's dysfunction at different levels. And there's definitely from team to team dysfunction in some areas. Some teams are obviously well run, some teams aren't so well run. And so every time you go to a different environment, a different place, you're dealing with just a bunch of different issues that are going on. But when it actually comes to the coaching part, you have your assignments, you have your roles. They're defined for you on why you got hired or what they want you to do. And you kind of just, follow those niches. Obviously being around Nelly, people assume right away that I was an offensive guy, which I feel very comfortable doing offense. For whatever reason, I got pigeonholed into being a bigs coach and dealt with just a tremendous amount of really good bigs that I ended up having the chance to work with and develop. I got to Toronto. Ended up being the defensive coach in Toronto. So, I think as a coach, you have to do everything. And again, it's just the more you can do, the better off you are. Just like we were talking about being positionless, you just got to be good at everything, in my opinion, if you want to be a good coach.
When you answer that question, you talked about like dysfunction from organization to organization. As a coach that has experienced probably a little bit of everything, when you look for a new job or when you start looking at, do you know, I don't even want to go near that organization because I've heard of how dysfunctional it is, or is that not really enter your mind frame?
I would really love to tell you that if you have multiple offers, then obviously that's great, but that's not always the case. Listen, there's only 30 jobs in the world, head coaching jobs, and then go down if there's 3 assistants, then Now you're talking about X amount of jobs. So there's not a lot of jobs. So when you get one, you better get it, regardless of what the situations are. Ideally, you'd love to find the right teams and the right coaches and the right organizations. But, it's really hard to, you don't see anyone really ever turn down a head coaching job in the NBA, regardless of how good or bad the teams are when it's offered to you. And it's the same thing with assistant coaches. The money's obviously very good, and you got to take the jobs when they're available and deal with whatever's there and hope that you can work things through or figure out or solve any of the problems that are going on.
So in addition to your coaching stints in the NBA, you've also had an opportunity to coach a couple different national teams.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little about how you got the opportunity to do that, and then what each one of those experiences was like for you? Because I know that had to be kind of an interesting, dynamic. So I'm curious as to how you got the opportunity to do that, and then what it was like at each one of those countries that you went to and coached.
For me, that's one of my favorite things to do is European / overseas basketball. And my first international job was with Turkey, and it was just more through getting in the NBA, continuing my networking. People that I was playing with in Turkey obviously were older, like I was getting older, had moved into the federation. My coach that I played for Turkey became the head coach and national team coach. And so that summer, through contacts and networking, I got invited to go there and be with them. And that's kind of how it's always played out. When I was in Toronto, I networked there, became great friends with Jay Toronto and Leo Routon, who are Canadian basketball, kind of very famous in Canadian basketball, and got with the Canadian national team. One summer, I got a call out of the blue, and for the next 2 summers, I worked with the Dominican Republic as the head coach for them. They were looking for a coach to qualify for the FIBA America Championships. When I left there, I called Eric Musselman. He became the coach there for 2 summers. And then recently I was in China about 2 years or 3 years ago, I think now, through Nike. China was getting ready for the championships over there, world championships, and they needed a bigs coach, and China's got a lot of them. And so I went over to China for the summer and ended up coaching with them. And then when that was over with, Yao Ming hired me to come back to Shanghai and mentor one of his coaches that was coaching his team that he owned, the Shanghai Sharks. So then I mentored a Chinese coach over there for the year. And then the year before that, I was obviously in Spain with Porzingis. So I've been a little bit all over the place. It's just more through networking, taking some chances and some risks to go do something different and out of the box. And the national team jobs, if you can find the right ones, they're great. They're obviously great teams over in Europe and great situations over there, and they're always fun to work.
What's the challenges when you're working with those teams from foreign countries? Is it the language? Is it the culture? Obviously, basketball kind of translates no matter what, but I'm sure there's got to be some barriers to you as an American coaching, a national team from another country.
I think it's the same when you just go coach another team that you haven't been with. You just eventually they got to know credibility wise, who are you, and you got to be able in the first few days show them that you know what you're talking about and why you're there, and you're there for their best interest, and convince them that you're, because they're all looking at you like, who is this guy, or what's he about, or what's he going to really do. And so it's like anything else. When you get your first job, you got to make a great impression, and that's always the hurdle. Like you said, most of the guys are speaking English. Basketball's an international language. Those really aren't the problems. It's just more gaining the credibility and trust from the players every time you go into those situations.
So just from what you've said, and I've heard you say it repeatedly over time, when you talk about networking and building relationships, talk about that, because we got a lot of coaches that are listening. Talk about how important it is to build up your network and to be able to have relationships and to just be able to help. Obviously people have helped you along the way, and I'm sure you've helped a lot of people, in return. So talk about how important that's been to your coaching career.
Well, I think it's the number one thing you have to do when you're younger. You have to get out to coaching clinics. You have to get out and be visible. You have to go volunteer. You have to take jobs that don't earn you any money. You know, we just here in Iowa with the Timberwolves, we just hired 2 interns that are really getting paid virtually no money, but they're here for the experience. They're here for their resume. They're here to 5 months to get it on the resume, to have the Timberwolves or myself for them. So you got to have a lot of different ways to sacrifice some of the situations you're in. It's not always going to be about trying to get a job that pays you if you're really passionate about getting into coaching. You're going to have to take the long drive somewhere to go see a clinic or meet coaches, emails, networks, and you just got to stay on top of it and start rating your guys that you're going to go to. So it's huge for young coaches to be in those environments, expose themselves to those environments, but again, be able to go up and approach a coach and ask for an email address or a phone number or a contact, or where's the next clinic at, or where can I go see this or that. It's crucial. As I've gotten older, and I'm older now, I don't do that as much anymore. But when I first started out, that's all I did. When I was in Platteville, thinking if I was going to go to college basketball or go in the NBA, that 6 months, at that time, there was no emails at that time. Email was just starting to come out. So I was faxing almost every day. Every NBA team, my resumes, what I can do, where I've been the last few years, and just continue to hope someone hits me back so I can start a relationship with them. So it's a process, and sometimes it's not the most flattering thing to do to chase people down, and you'll know if guys are going to help you or not pretty quick, but it's the number one thing you have to do. If you're a college coach, a coach looking to get into college, you got to start to find out who the ADs are in high school. Who are the athletic directors? Who are the guys that have the juice to go hire you in those situations or recommend you? So it's critical. It's very hard to get a job without knowing somebody nowadays.
Yeah, it's amazing the number of people that we've talked to that just are connected. Just as an example here on the podcast, we talked to Coach Greg White from Arkansas. I met him at a USA basketball coaching clinic here, and then since then, Greg's just had a tremendous connection to guys who have worked at the Snow Valley basketball camp, which actually is based out there in Iowa, where you are now. And through that, we had Don Showalter from USA Basketball come on. It's just been amazing, again, just by knowing one connection. And just it was me walking up to Greg randomly after he talked at the clinic. And then from there, we've been able to get some great guests on and have some people. So I think that having that network and having people that will advocate for you, and again, like you said, once you have somebody advocate for you, you better make sure you're doing a good job and you know what you're doing and that you're working really hard. But that network is so critically important. Like, just as an example, how many people did you have apply for the unpaid internship with the Iowa Wolves?
They don't come directly to me. Some find their way to get to me, but I would say throughout the course of the summer, because we hire 2 every year down here, I would say pushing 50 to 70, easy.
Yeah, and there again, you're talking about a G League position that's unpaid. The number of people that want to make their living in coaching and in basketball and in the NBA is just huge. And so you really got to be willing to go out and pound the pavement and work and do the things that are necessary to pay your dues to be able to get into those positions. You talked a little bit about how before you came to your current job that you were over in Spain working with Kristaps Porzingis. So explain a little bit about how that came to be and then what that experience was like and whether or not you knew that he was going to have the type of success that he had in the NBA. Because I know when he was drafted, obviously the New York fans weren't too happy and there was a lot of boos when he got selected. So were you of a different mindset when he got picked that, hey, these people don't know what they're about to see?
Yeah, what happened basically, that summer, I was actually going to go with Byron Scott to the Lakers, and I was waiting all summer, and the Lakers dragged their feet hiring him. And I was out in the Las Vegas Summer League, and one of the guys that I coached for a couple of years, Jose Calderon from Spain, had told me about this job, about these young kids that were over there. And I didn't think much about it. And by the time I got to Vegas, they still hadn't hired Byron. And one thing led to another, and my name circulated, and then they came to me if I was interested in it. And I said yes, and I took a chance, and I left the NBA. And I think I'm the second European coach ever to have 3 guys drafted off the same team in Europe. I had him, Porzingis went, and then Willie Hernandez-Gomez went, and he's in Charlotte right now. And then this other guy, Nikolai Rodicevic, a point guard, went to Denver. So when I got over there, I knew the first day when I walked in the gym and saw him, he was going to be a star, and just a young kid and just oozing with talent. I got a kick out of it when they drafted him, but the Knicks did the right thing and took him. Can you imagine if he was in Philadelphia with that group? Because he can very easily have been picked instead of Okafor at that time. So just a tremendous worker. You know, my time over in Spain was great. Obviously, I had a young team with these guys, and just a great experience for me to, again, deal with some young players, a different type of style of basketball, expand your coaching. It was all good.
So with all your experience at all these different levels of professional basketball, can you talk about what makes the guys who are truly great at whatever level they're playing, whether it's a EuroLeague player or it's an NBA player, what separates the guys who get to the level of a Nowitzki and a Nash compared to the guy who ends up just being an average player in the NBA? Is it their work ethic? Is it their passion? Is it their talent? What is it that separates the guys who truly become some of the best in the game, in your opinion?
I mean, I think it's obviously a combination of some things. I mean, I think all of them are humble and they're hungry. They have a desire that's deep down inside of them. They have a passion that's second to none, and they have a work ethic that's second to none. They just are accountable, and they remain accountable, and they're coachable. The great players want to be coached. The guys that got excuses don't want to be coached. And so I just think there's just a combination of a few things. But if you take away some of the talent, because some guys aren't quite as talented. I mean, if you actually saw Steve Nash, you wouldn't say right off the bat he's going to woo you with his physicalness or his size. But the work ethics, you can't work with him. I mean, he's just so diligent in what he does. He's just at another level. And the great pros are like that. You know, like I said, I got to be with Karl Malone and see him work, and John Stockton. These guys are just at another level of work ethic and passion to do what they do. They love to compete. They're fearless. They're workers. They show up and do the work. And as easy as that sounds, not everyone likes to do it. Some guys just rely on their talent and think they're going to skate by. But the great ones have great work ethics.
So when you see young kids, I know this is one of the things that I think when we talk to high school coaches and you see kind of the basketball landscape, to kind of bring the conversation full circle from where we started with the AAU circuit and all these things. When we talked to Coach Showalter from USA Basketball, and they just did their October mini camp out in Colorado Springs where they brought in like 80 of the top, freshmen through senior high school players. And he talked about how they're really the first group of coaches that maybe has ever told these guys something about the holes in their game or things they need to work on, because so often nowadays kids are, high school coaches might be afraid to tell their best player, hey, you need to work on this, for fear that the kid will transfer or leave the school or go somewhere else. And, obviously their summer AAU coaches and stuff are incentivized to keep them on their team, to keep the shoe dollars flowing and to keep their team successful and whatever the case might be. So do you find that it's a little bit, it's sometimes challenging when guys first get in the league, or especially, like at the level that you're at, where guys may not be as receptive to coaching as they are at first, and it takes some convincing for them to really understand that, coaches are trying to make them better and get them to where they can get to?
I mean, I think like anything else, I always say you got to be a truth sayer, and you got to tell them the truth at the end of the day, and what you feel and what you believe. And if you're just going to dance around issues or coddle a kid and think that you're worried about that all the time, you're going to be in trouble. You're never going to get anywhere with them. And at the end of the day, my opinion is you don't want to be with them to begin with if they're like that. So, it's like at every level. You gotta give the good and the bad. You gotta know when to hug them. You gotta know when to kick them in the rear. And if you don't have that type of personality as a coach, you're not going to do very well. But you got to be true to yourself And, you know, you can have some special treatment of some guys here and there, but you better be fair across the board in general and be able to tell the truth to the guys and prove why you're saying what you're saying and not just saying it.
Scott, this has been tremendous. We really appreciate you jumping on and taking the time out of your busy schedule right as you're about to start your season. I want to wish you good luck with the Iowa Wolves and hope that you guys have a great year and that you're able to develop some guys and have a guy or two off your roster, make it up to the parent club and see them out on an NBA floor with the Timberwolves. We really appreciate you jumping on with us. Is there a way for people that might want to reach out to you, have a question, or just after listening to you want to reach out to you? Is there a way that people can get in contact with you?
You just go through the iowawolves.com, the information there. If you go to the Iowa Wolves website there, they're going to give you a general contact information and everything that goes there. I get it anyway, Perfect. So that'd be the easiest way to do it.
All right, well, Scott, thank you again. It's been a pleasure having the conversation with you. And to everyone out there, we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. If you're looking for a great way to spend the holidays playing some basketball, please join us at one of our Head Start basketball holiday camps on December 27th and 28th, 2018. We'll have a camp at Hoop Guru Courthouse in Hinckley and also at St. Paschal Baylon School in Highland Heights. The Head Start basketball holiday camps will emphasize the fundamentals of basketball with individual attention given to each camper. You'll improve your basketball skills and have a ton of fun at the Head Start Basketball Holiday Camp. To register or get more information, please visit our website, www.headstartbasketball.com. Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads Podcast, brought to you by Head Start Basketball.